Welcome to the 16th episode of A Change with a Chance. My name is Ryan Lowe, and my goal is to educate my listeners, especially young ones, on the issue in this world by interviewing different experts. Plastic is all around us. It's in your house, your school, your job, your life. Every place you go will have plastic. It might seem that the way to get rid of all of this is to recycle, but while it's popular, is it right? There are many different ways to end plastic, and today, brothers Mr. Nick and Hans Schippers will talk about the organization they work with and the dangers that the plastic industries hide in plain sight. First of all, Parley for the Oceans is a non-profit organization that addresses the major threats to our oceans, the most important ecosystem. They have an amazing system for how to get things done. First up, they go through the planning meeting known as the Parley Talk. Second is the Parley Collaborative Session. And finally, we have the Collaborative Project. We'll talk about those shortly. Not only that, but they are also a space where creators, thinkers, and leaders come together to raise awareness of the beauty and fragility of our oceans. Mr. Nick and Hans co-run the Parley AIR Station, which is an exhibit you should visit while you're in Oahu, Hawaii. AIR stands for Avoid, Intercept, Redesign. There, they upcycle plastic while educating everyone on many plastic-related topics. If you can remember, I interviewed Mr. Nick in August, where I talked to him for a few minutes about International Coastal Cleanup Day. I also added an Instagram post about the contents of the air station. Not only did they run the air station, but they also started the SCHroadtrip, where they went around the coast educating students on plastic pollution and how to save the ocean. Their work is spectacular, and it is such an honor for me to introduce Mr. Nick and Mr. Hans Schippers. Hello, Mr. Nick and Mr. Hans. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for having us on today. We appreciate that amazing introduction in terms of describing Parley. I think maybe you got a future working for us. You did a great job describing our organization there. But yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and we look forward to diving into some of the questions you have and hopefully giving some information to you and your listeners that's valuable for you guys as you kind of work through life here and as you grow up.
Well, then let's do just that. Could you please tell everyone a little bit about what Parley for the Oceans does and the work you guys have done with them?
Yeah, I could take a crack at that. So Parley for the Oceans is basically an international conservation organization. And we have about 30 teams around the globe. And Parley really focuses on collaboration. So collaborating with local NGOs and nonprofits that are on the ground doing the work, doing cleanups and education, and working with them to further their reach. But they also collaborate at an industry level with some brands like the sneaker company Adidas, who everybody probably knows who Adidas is, where just this last year we made 15 million pairs of shoes with them that were made from ocean plastic that was cleaned up off beaches in the Maldives and in the Dominican Republic. So Parley's hands are in a couple different buckets, but their main kind of mission is to end the destruction of the oceans while bringing awareness to the beauty and fragility of them. And they do that through these collaboration efforts. And what Nick and I kind of specialize in, and what we've brought to the table with Parley, is our expertise within the education realm. So to date, Nick and I have educated just around 30,000 students all around the world about the plastic pollution problem. And we really see that as a key aspect to solving this issue, because we strongly believe that youth have the most powerful voice in the world, and we want to figure out different ways that we can enable them to use that voice. So whether it's, giving a school a talk and that school goes on to ban single-use plastic within their school, or organize a community event and really kind of start giving these kids the tools to not only build their community, but be activists for this plastic pollution problem. So you mentioned, Ryan, in the beginning, Nick and I are currently here at the Parley AIR Station in Hawaii, which is a collaborative hub for people and students to come and learn about the oceans and the threats that face them. And part of what we're doing here is educating students here on Oahu, throughout the Hawaiian Islands and around the world about these ocean threats and what they can do about it. So I think in a nutshell, that's about what we do.
Yeah, I'd add on to that really quickly, Ryan, is that you mentioned Parley is a nonprofit organization. We are both a nonprofit and a for-profit organization. There's two branches to Parley. The for-profit side engages more on like corporate partnerships and that type of stuff. And they use the proceeds from that work to support the nonprofit side of the operations, which in large part is our cleanup network. So
I agree with what you were saying earlier, Mr. Hans, about children having the strongest voice, and I'm very glad that you're helping educate us. Thank you for that.
No worries.
So I had a short Instagram interview with you, Mr. Nick, at the air station. And there were so many amazing things to see there, such as the fun upcycled building blocks, the plastic-free Adidas shoes you mentioned earlier, and many educational screens. So can you please tell us the origins of the air station, what it does now, and what your plans are for the future?
Yeah, I think that the origins of the air station basically stem from the fact that Parley as an organization has worked really hard to facilitate these very high level organizations coming to the table to engage with ocean issues, right? And so if you get a major player like Adidas or the World Bank or the United Nations to come to the table around ocean issues, that's extremely important. But I think what's kind of set in and what Parley realizes now more than ever is the importance of pushing not only from the top down with these higher level organizations, but also pushing from, and I would not just say also, but simultaneously pushing from the bottom up with grassroots organization tactics, right? And that means not only engaging people in beach cleanups, but taking that a step further and bringing communities together to really just hammer out some ways that they may be able to resolve some of the problems that face our oceans at a community level, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't have Adidas go into a community and say, hey, we're going to solve your ocean issues for you, right? You need that community to understand their own ways that they can take action on that issue and to move forward as a community rather than having a larger corporation come in from the top down and tell them how to do it, right? And so the air station is kind of an expansion on our cleanup network. It's an expansion on the work that our coordinators do around the world at the grassroots level to try and further that conversation and say, you know, cleanups are great, but what can we do that's kind of the next step? And how can we take this conversation further to ensure that communities are coming together and learning about the oceans and doing the things that are best for that community in particular to grow and to change and to adapt in ways that help take care of our oceans.
I'm just going to ask this now. You taught me a little bit about this at the air station when I was there. Can you tell us a little more about how you upcycled those building blocks? Because I love those a lot.
Yeah, so those are pretty cool. So we take plastic that we've cleaned up off beaches around island here. And we also use some plastic that we've gathered in collaboration with the museum. So the museum, Bishop Museum on Oahu, for those of you guys that don't know, is a incredibly important facility in sort of, I don't know how to describe that, but Bishop Museum's an amazing facility, right? It's a world-class museum. And here on Oahu, we are working with Bishop Museum to actually do a waste audit with them. So we're taking some of the plastic that they're using across their operations that their staff use on a day-to-day basis. And we're also taking plastic that we've cleaned up off beaches with Sustainable Coastlines Hawaii. And we're cleaning that plastic. We're sorting it by type. There's 7 categories of plastic, right? And then we're basically grinding that plastic down and running it through these machines that melt it and make it back into something. We basically fill a mold. And there's two main processes we use with that. One's called extrusion, and the other is called injection molding. And we've also just started actually doing sheets with the sheet press, which is basically like baking a big pancake with this plastic. And so to get those bricks, we use that extrusion process. And we basically take that plastic that we grinded up and we melt it and push it into a big brick mold, and then cool that mold off. And then we're able to pound out one of those bricks. It's a pretty remarkable process. If you guys want to learn more about it, the machines we use are actually designed by an organization called Precious Plastic. And you guys can look them up online to learn more about those machines and kind of how they operate.
On the topics of the things that we talked about then, another one of those terms was greenwashing.
Yes.
I've heard this term here and there, but I think that it's something that is very important to everyday life. What is greenwashing and why would companies do it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. And I would like Hans to fill in on this after I answer it as well. But greenwashing, in the simplest sense, greenwashing is basically saying that you're being environmentally friendly when you're not. And there's a lot of reasons companies will do this. Right now, in today's day and age, it's very, very important to look like you're doing something for the environment, because if you're not, that's bad business, right? People don't want to buy clothes from a company if they know that clothing company is not doing something good for the environment, or if they know that, like, hey, like that clothing company, they get their textiles from overseas, they don't treat their workers very well when they make their clothes, and there's all these issues with those clothes. Like, I don't want to support that, right, as an individual. And that's just clothing industry is one example. There's hundreds of examples across all sorts of industries of where companies pollute and have environmental, if not social, issues. And greenwashing is basically saying, hey, we're sustainable, but not backing up that claim in any form and not using any action to back up that claim, right? And so what I would say is that when you're going out as individuals and you're looking at organizations or companies or products, the best thing you can do as an individual is just do the most research around those products that you have the time and capacity to do. Because at the end of the day, it's up to individuals to hold these companies accountable. And if a company's greenwashing, you know, nowadays you can walk into any supermarket and all these foods will say natural, organic, like, and unless they really are holding themselves to that standard, it's really hard to say, like, oh, like this label means that it's actually organic. What does that mean, right? Did they use fertilizer? Did they not use fertilizer? Is their soil good soil or is it bad soil? Did they use pesticides on their crops? All these other issues, right? Is that seed genetically modified? Is it not genetically modified? It's really important for us as individuals to do our best to decipher that information. And more, it's becoming harder and harder to do a good job of that because so many organizations are claiming that they're doing something they're not. And this is where community becomes really important, because say you get your food from your neighbor down the street. It's a lot easier to ask your neighbor, hey, how'd you grow these vegetables, than it is to ask this giant company, hey, how'd you grow these vegetables, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of a long-winded explanation. I'd love to hear Hans tie into that a bit more.
Yeah, I'd say like greenwashing, or there's also blue washing in respect to the oceans. And I think, you know, like what Nick's getting at is super important for us to be cognizant of and thinking about as we move forward as a society. But you can't ding them for trying, right? At least they're taking that initial step. And it's the marketing which really throws it off and throws it for a loop. So we see this a lot, at least in respect to like the surfing industry. There's a lot of brands in the surfing industry that are starting to go down this rabbit hole of saying that they're sustainable and they're utilizing recycled clothing in their product lines. And the reality of that is, in most cases, it's not. It's not 100% recycled clothing or polyester for that matter. And the issue with that, and especially within the surfing industry, is you get a lot of people that are water oriented and spend a lot of the time in these communities surfing and enjoying the oceans for recreation. And these companies are basically selling a product to them that makes them feel that they're protecting the place that they love, or protecting the place that they spend the most time, which, you know, in some cases isn't true, and in some cases it is. So we just got to be cognizant about, you know, what brands we are supporting, and while we figure that out, also what are the parameters in which we're calling them sustainable, because the word sustainable is pretty greenwash to begin with.
Yeah. As long as there's no agreed upon definition for sustainable, I mean, you can Google it and it'll tell you something, but who enforces that when a company says, hey, I'm sustainable, right? And the way it works in America with our capitalistic structure is that you can put just about anything on a label or a product, and there's very, very little that you have to do to back that up in most cases, right? And so if there was a regulation that said, like, hey, if you're going to put sustainable on your product, it has to meet all these requirements, then that would be great, right? But you have to get to that point where everyone can agree, like, yeah, that's what we're going to call sustainable, right? And it's hard to get to that point. And people don't want to be subject to that kind of regulation, right? They want a chance to interpret it on their own. So greenwashing is a very complex thing, Ryan, but what I would say is that do your best to research the companies and the organizations and the products that you're using and supporting, and don't be so hard on yourself when you find out inevitably that some of those companies and products are not holding up their end of the deal, right? Because in most cases, they're not. And even the ones that stand out as being like ahead of the curve on this stuff still have a long way to go.
So this whole idea of greenwashing, I think, is just another way that companies are putting danger in plain sight. Speaking of danger in plain sight, now we're going to talk about recycling. The one thing we've learned as children about saving Earth is recycling. I've learned of many times where all recycling did was add to the carbon pollution or create random giant blocks of plastic out of failure. I've watched countless documentaries of how recycling is not our way out of the plastic problem. It's just some myth that fossil fuel companies have constructed to make us not question where plastic goes after it leaves our hand. What is this recycling myth? How much of it is actually true? And if we don't recycle our plastic, what do we do with it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. Hans can add into this one too. I'll give you a quick synopsis of it. But basically, recycling, we can recycle plastic of all kinds. We don't do it because it's extremely expensive to do it correctly. And because it is so expensive, it's what we call cost prohibitive. So we do not do it for the most part. In the US, the vast majority of the plastic we consume does not get recycled. And the stuff that does get recycled only gets recycled once, usually every now and then twice. And this has to do with the material plastic itself. Structurally, plastic does not recycle well multiple times in a row. And yeah, it's just not something we've invested time and energy into, and it's not something that the plastics industry and companies want us to understand is a failure, essentially. And what it does is it does exactly what they want, which it places the burden of the waste onto us, because they say you need to recycle rather than this is our product and we're going to take care for the waste on the back end of that product as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Ryan. We're not experts in recycling. We don't work at like a recyclery that deals with all the plastic waste that's consumed within society, but it's different in every place that you go. And that's something that should be known across the board, is that some cities or some counties will recycle different amounts of plastic than other cities or counties will. And some cities and counties have invested in that to be able to do that. So I would say to your listeners and to you to think about, where you are. And the best thing that you can do is look it up on your local website and see what the waste management facilities do and don't take. But also be cognizant of that a lot of these recycleries are funded by the American Chemistry Council. And that's part of this whole plastic pollution problem that we've seen is, up until 2 years ago, 70% of the world was sending our plastic that we didn't want, exporting it out of the United States and the United Kingdom, and it would end up in countries like Indonesia and other underdeveloped countries where they have no way to deal with this stuff. And a lot of this plastic waste would easily make its way out into the oceans, which is where we start seeing that plastic pollution problem on the beaches and in the fish and the marine life. So it's kind of two-part, but I would say, first things first, check in with your local waste management system. What do they take? Or are we as consumers just wish cycling, which is the idea that we can throw anything that's plastic or we think is recyclable in the bin and it's going to go away. So that's the first thing to do our part, is to actually put the right items in the bin. And then the second part of that is to just try and consume less, because a lot of it is going to make its way or be exported out of the country or get incinerated. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does. So that was a lot to take in. Summarizing, most of this is true, but the primary problem is that the plastic industries are blaming us for all of this plastic instead of taking accountability. And at the same time, everywhere you go, the recycling efforts vary. So the first thing we should be doing is checking in with our local recycling efforts.
Yeah. It's not, recycling in theory could work, Ryan. But it doesn't work in practice, is the best way I could put it. And so we do recycle a little bit, but it's not, hardly puts a dent in the amount of plastic that we actually consume and dispose of.
Yeah. That's just something, like, think of it as what I just told you is something that you can do right now, like today, to think about it. But the reality of the problem, Ryan, is like we can't recycle how much plastic we produce. So like last year, I think the US invested around $200 billion in the new plastic production and $1 billion into recycling. You can't recycle $200 billion worth of plastic with $1 billion worth of recycling. So we're producing way more than we can manage realistically. So recycling is a broken system, but we need to try and, if we can't fix it, which we shouldn't be focusing our energy there, we should be focusing at stop producing it to begin with, because there's other materials that we can move on to that we're not going to have to deal with this recycling mess to begin with.
Well, if not recycling, what about one of the other things that you two tackled, upcycling? When I visited the air station, I learned about upcycling and how only plastics types 2 and 7 can be properly used for it. Honestly, this did upset me a little bit, and I wanted to know from you why that is and what we can do with the other plastic types.
Yeah, so it's 2 and 5.
Oops, sorry about that.
It's okay. Yeah. Upcycling, Ryan, is essentially recycling, but you're taking an item that's rendered useless or of very low value and melting it and creating something that has some sort of use value to it. And so it's called upcycling because you're taking that item and you're turning it into something of greater value than it was before. when we think about upcycling, it's very similar to recycling. It's not a solution, right? And we don't want people to come to the air station and think that upcycling is a solution. What we use upcycling for at the air station is basically to communicate how difficult it is to actually work with this material plastic, and how hard it is to get that material to be made back into something that is useful. But the goal of the upcycling here is really just to get people thinking outside the box, because we're inundated in this day and age with negative information about this problem. And we're taught that, you know, there's plastic pollution everywhere and there's nothing we can do to solve it. But if we sit here with that attitude, we're never going to get anywhere. So the upcycling here, we're taking things of lower value, we're making them into something that has some sort of use, right? It's probably a very little and not very significant use in a lot of ways. But the goal is to show that, like, we need to flip the way that we think about this problem, from focusing on all the problems to actually like start talking about what are we actually doing about it? What are there solutions out there? And what are we doing to attain those? And so we use the upcycling here as sort of a tool to facilitate that kind of discussion.
Yeah. And even if, Ryan, even if we stop producing plastic today, like right now, if all the plastic production stopped in the world, the plastic that's out in the oceans will be there for probably the rest of my life, probably the rest of your life. There's going to be plastic in the oceans. So when we clean that stuff up, and, you know, inevitably we're going to have to get that stuff out of the oceans with technology and volunteer efforts and all that good stuff, what are we going to do with it? And that's kind of what we want to show here at the air station is like, hey, we need to stop producing plastic. But in the meantime, with this stuff that's on the beaches, let's, instead of just throwing it away and burning it, because plastic's made from oil, when we burn it, it off gases, methane and ethylene and all those terrible toxins. Let's turn it back into something that can be used in people's everyday lives.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just thinking about some of those examples that we got from you of upcycling, like the carabiners that we still have.
Yeah.
Now, not only are you part of Parley, not only are you both pro upcyclers, but you are both on the SCHroadtrip. Now, please tell us all what that is and some of your most important experiences going across the coast.
Yeah, so Hans can speak to this one. The SCHroadtrip, best trip of our lives.
Yeah, this is kind of, this Parley Air Station, Ryan, is kind of an extension of the work that Nick and I were doing prior to this, which was, you know, the term that was coined SCHroadtrip, which used to stand for Sustainable Coastlines Hawaii Road Trip. And then we kind of pushed on it to get it to say Schippers Road Trip. But it was kind of the Instagram or social media account / mission that Nick and I started our journey on in the environmental scape. And it was after I graduated from the University of Hawaii and Nick graduated from the University of Washington. I was finishing up an undergrad. He was finishing up a master's degree. And they were both, you know, in the environmental field. Nick's degree more than mine. And we both got 9-to-5 jobs. We went out and did, you know, what society tells you to do. You got to go put on a suit and tie, and you got to work, and you got to save. And it really started to drive me, especially, up a wall. I couldn't take it because I knew the work that I was doing wasn't as valuable as what I could be doing and how I could be spending my time. So I called Nick up one afternoon with an idea, I guess, and it was basically, how can we do something that makes us happier, that we're creating change in the world towards a problem that we're really familiar with, especially because Nick and I grew up surfing probably some of the most remote coastlines in the United States, and we see this plastic pollution problem firsthand. And how can we do something that's different and exciting? So that was kind of the roots of the SCHroadtrip, or Nick calls it SCHroadtrip. And yeah, it kind of led us. We took Sustainable Coastline Hawaii's curriculum, and we set out with a goal to teach 10,000 students in the first year, and that was just on the West Coast. And it was absolutely incredible. We got to see places that we've never been to before, and that led us into another mission that led to working with Parley, where we got to drive across the United States and throughout the country of Canada, and host a series of beach cleanups that was an effort to clean about 850,000 square meters of Canadian national parks and coastlines. So all in all, the SCHroadtrip mission has been a success. And the reason it's been a success is we're taking the knowledge that we have about plastic pollution, and we're bringing that mobily to communities and making it accessible for them. So that's kind of my 2 cents about the SCHroadtrip. We missed the bus life in some senses, but it was a good time.
Well, I'm curious, do you have like any enlightening or even funny experiences going across the coast?
Oh yeah,
All kinds of them.
we have. I think the biggest one for us, Ryan, is that we got to go to communities that people would often, write off from wanting to participate in environmental action, like middle of America, middle of Canada kind of communities where there's these stereotypes that, they're right wing, they're not pro environment. And what really broke that and opened Nick and I's eyes up was getting to go into those communities and host these events where they were some of the most hardworking people, open to understanding these issues, and most willing to take action on it once they recognized the importance of it. So tons of good stories, but I think most eye-opening experience was probably that.
Breaking stereotypes, pretty important, yeah. So we only have 2 questions left, and we're going to start with the more fun one. If somehow you had $1 million to spend on the fight against plastic pollution, what would each of you do with it?
Great question.
I'd probably lobby a politician to go pass a plastics ban.
Yeah, that would be a good one. I think it would be cool, Ryan, to maybe donate that million to, 5 or 10 environmental nonprofits that are doing really good work at the community level. But I think, trying to spread that money around and put it in places that are sort of the most impactful in generating change around these problems, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But yeah, who knows? Or maybe we'd just blow it all and get a boat and drive out to the middle of the Pacific garbage patch and hang out there for a while.
Yeah, I'd say lobby a politician or put it back into the school system. Yeah, there's going to be a jet that flies over us right now. Oh, we're going to mute for a second.
All right. We're right by an Air Force base here, so the jets go over pretty often.
Yeah, I remember that when I was there. Well, I like both of those ideas. And so, lastly, what is your advice for kids who want to help fight against plastic pollution?
Yeah, I think, this could tie into the last question as well. If I had $1 million to give to kids and students, my advice to, even without the $1 million, to any young person that wants to get involved in this movement is don't be afraid to take risks. And if you have an idea about something on how you want to solve an issue, it doesn't even have to be environmental. It could be social, political, what have you. If you have an idea on how to solve something, don't be afraid to run with it, because you never know where that idea might take you. So take chances, be bold, be loud, and go out there and get after it.
Well, that sounds good.
Yeah, I would second that, Ryan. I do think, for youth around the world today, it's an extremely interesting time to be a kid. And there's so much information out there, and there's so much diversity of opinion. It's challenging in this day and age to try and like forge your own legacy or just be your own self. And like really just, I think the best thing youth can do in this day and age is just focus on your own 2 feet and just take a step at a time, and don't worry so much about all the crazy stuff that's going on around you, because that stuff's always going to be there. The best thing you can do is try and tap into who you are as a human, and do the best to do the things that make you happy and make you a better person for those around you, right?
Yeah. You saying that makes me feel good and motivates me. So thank you. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Nick and Mr. Hans. You are two hard-working brothers, and thank you for all of your work.
Right on, Ryan. Thank
Thanks
you
for having us.
That's it for A Change of the Chance, episode 16. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, and bye.